Well, welcome everyone. I really want to thank you for being with us today. We're joined today with three members of Trinity Church, all in the mental health profession. And we're here to talk about our emotional well-being in these times of crisis, in this time of stay at home, in this time of isolation. And I am joined today by David Manley, who is a medical doctor of psychiatry and chief of geriatrics at the Veterans Administration, and spouse of my colleague, Dylan Manley, our financial assistant at Trinity Church. And we're joined by Dr. Lori Hamilton, PhD in clinical psychology and in private practice, and Jason McKeown, a licensed marriage and family therapist and in private practice as well. Thank you all for being here. These are unprecedented times. That word is thrown around a lot, but it truly is the case that not in our lifetimes have we had such a event happen on a national basis. And it's a global event, but for us in our own nation, the closest thing that comes to it is September 11th, but even that had a kind of small window of time of crisis before we realized we were safe. I just want to take a few moments to hear from your professional opinions about what we can do to enhance our resiliency in these moments and in these times and keep our emotional well-being intact and healthy in all types of situations. So I want to ask first about the fact that what are the dynamics of isolation? What does somebody experience in isolation? How do we keep ourselves well and whole in isolation? And David Manley, why don't you start us off?
Okay, I'd be glad to. So isolation is something very important, particularly in the population that I often work with in older people who often live alone, may not have much support, may not have family around, and may not also be comfortable with technology to be able to connect. And may have health problems or problems communicating, hearing, that just compounds the problem. So, it affects people of any age who are isolated. Connection is so important for wellness. And so I think, it's important to encourage people to not let the fear or emotions keep them from reaching out and trying to maintain connections.
Yeah, I think one of the things that has been so powerful, I guess I would say at this time, and we have shared this among the church staff to our surprise, is certainly not suggesting it's a replacement, but how powerful this type of platform here that we're experiencing can be in these moments of isolation. And we have actually brought a couple of our members, a device so that they could participate. Because we're really not able to send people into their home even to look at how their device might work and so on and so forth. So that's really been an important piece. I certainly, my heart it goes out so much for the members of our own parish and for all who are not able to even see their own family and their own grandchildren during this time. And so I know that these platforms are so powerful, and at the very least that telephone call on a regular basis. That's so deeply helpful. I guess another question that is going through my mind, and I know we have some other ways where we're going to be engaging these questions at this time, is kind of around this aspect of closeness. And for those of us who actually have the opportunity to be with other human beings in our home, that aren't necessarily used to being so close to the people we love. What are some practices that are important to remember in these times? And of course, I'm speaking selfishly as a parent of two teenage boys who are not able to be with their friends, who are looking at a whole month of this experience at the very least. Jason, I wonder if you have any words of wisdom for us.
Well, I think lots of prayer is definitely in order. But beyond that, I would say, I think you're right. The certainty and structure for kids has been drastically affected and changed to what they know to be normal is suddenly very different. You're right. The ability for them to move through that has been really challenging, especially for adolescents who are individuating from their family, spending more time with friends, and now all of a sudden they're kind of thrusted back into the family a little bit. And as a result of that, they are spending more time than they ever have before, parents included, trying to figure out how to balance work and supporting their kids through school and other challenges that they might have. So it really has changed the family system back to a couple hundred years ago when everybody kind of worked in the home and on the farm and kind of that more rural life. It's definitely changed that family dynamic in a lot of ways. And what can be difficult is when an adolescent especially has some frustration with not being able to connect with their friends. Sometimes they can take it out on other members of the family. They're not sure how to regulate or entertain themselves. And technology is a great way to do that. They can connect with peers over Zoom, other platforms, which is great, but it's still a lot of technology time for them. And knowing how to reconnect with family members and just have that physical, real face-to-face interaction and connection is both needed and at the same time a bit awkward and uncomfortable because they're not used to having it as frequently and as much and as often as they do.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you. I mean, I think that, all parents who are worried about their children being too engrossed in technology, it's kind of this moment and this time is one of the things we've had to give up a little bit on.
Yes, absolutely.
Because it's a major method of communication. I know, I'm sure at this very moment, my two children are connecting through a video game with their cousin in New England and another friend in another part of the state. And as I walk by, I have to let go of the frustration I have with them on technology because it's the only means they have to connect at this moment.
Well, and I think for parents especially, finding a new way of connecting with their kids because we're around so often. So our normal, how was your day? What did you do today? Isn't enough to kind of fill that dynamic. So coming up with creative and unique questions to ask each other, to learn more about each other more than we usually do will be helpful. I know many families have those questions that they can kind of do at the dinner table, just random facts and questions. So if we can engage in different ways, we can start to be more creative in how we spend time with each other. And then just be able to listen to each other, especially our kids are going through a lot, but they can't always articulate it well. And so being both patient with them and giving time and space for them to vet those frustrations. And as parents, not feeling like we have to fix all of those things that are difficult for them right now, but just hearing them sometimes is the best thing we can do.
That's very helpful. The other thing, I think that leads into another question, Laura. I wonder if you might say a few words about kind of the more overall kind of experience of anxiety that is present in our culture at this moment. I mean, it just kind of hangs out there in thin air. And one of the things I've been trying to practice myself, whether or not I've been successful, but also say a few words about as a priest of our parish and as a priest of the church, is how important it is to be gentle with one another and kind with
Mhm.
one another at these times. I mean, you hear of, there's lots of worry, there's lots of anxiety. It's coming out, and the fact that there's no toilet paper on the shelves, even though we have no reason to believe that they're not going to continue manufacturing toilet paper and supplying it to our grocery stores. And so, from a mental health perspective, what are the most important things to have in our toolkit, so to say, as we're thinking of anxiety, the anxiety we feel, but also the anxiety that we feel from others. I've experienced in the grocery store and from some neighbors, some kind of shortness. And, I've had to take a deep breath and just say, now's the time to extend extra grace.
Right. Well, I think the best way to think of it is that actually we're in a dangerous time. All right. We have not only a medical threat that's scary, that we don't fully know the consequences of, that's scary. We have a completely abnormal situation of having things shut down. We're used to little shutdowns, like if there's a blizzard or there's a hurricane. Probably one of the longest periods of shutdown we had was after 9/11. We did
Right.
not have flights flying. I was actually on the first commercial flight to New York once they had opened up the airspace for non-military travel. That was weird as all get out. All right. And so what was normal reactions were to an exceptionally abnormal situation. And I can say that's pretty much where we are now.
Yeah.
So our usual coping strategies have been upended, although we still know about them and we yearn for them. They've gotten interrupted. So for a person who is stuck at home, doesn't have family and friends that they can readily contact, experiencing more isolation, that's not normal for them.
Right.
Family being all together, sort of maybe too much together, not having enough space. It's not normal. It's not your usual coping. Part of what happens with anxiety, part of what happens with fear, we get very focused on what we're afraid of,
Right.
which is a good thing.
Yeah.
It's very, very good. But we stop thinking.
Yeah.
And for problem solving, we need to be able to think. Interestingly enough, some of the spiritual practices, such as prayer, meditation, deliberately paying attention to beauty, getting lost in a song,
Yeah.
getting lost looking at springtime, okay, are all ways that we actually literally clear our mind, okay? It opens our ability to start thinking.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we're going to usually react just the way God wired us. We're either going to fight, we're going to run,
Yeah.
we're going to freeze.
Right.
And when you encounter hostility, you've got someone who's ready to fight. When you encounter somebody who basically won't engage with you or dismisses you, you've got the flee response. And when you've got somebody who's sitting there, just like a little mushroom, you've got the freeze response.
Right. That's very helpful. I think because fear is what I hear you saying is that, you know, there is a natural aspect to the response of fear. And that natural aspect at times in life can keep us safe. And so we don't want to mock or minimize that kind of initial feeling of fear, so that we can use what I hear you saying is that, you know, we need to ask ourselves, how do we want to use it rightly? It helps us protect ourselves, it helps us protect our families,
Right.
and yet once we have done that, how do we cope? And
How do you cope? Right.
yeah, I really
Right
appreciate.
now, with people following the orders of the governor and the mayor and the medical people who know what they're talking about,
Yeah,
as much as we can,
yeah.
when they follow those orders, that's actually, believe it or not, a freeze response. We're complying with what we're
Mhm.
being told. Okay.
Mhm.
But to get beyond our instinctive protective responses, sometimes it's very helpful to have little exercises. I think it's very good for people to actually plan for periods to do activities. So it's
Okay.
very good to plan for the interaction time you'll have, plan for your Zoom time. Don't spread it out to 10 blocks during a day, right? Plan for physical activity, plan for quiet time, plan for non-socializing time. Okay. And just, you know, almost like schedule your day.
Right.
I came up with 6 questions if you'd like to hear them at some point.
Oh, sure.
Okay, these are, I'll email it to you so you can include it in.
Sure.
And they're daily quarantine questions. So the first question is, what am I grateful for today?
Hmm.
The second question is, who am I checking in on or connecting with today?
Hmm.
What expectations of normal am I letting go of today? How am I getting outside today? How am I moving my body today? What beauty am I creating, cultivating, or inviting in today?
That's very helpful, and I'm glad we will include that um, to share with people. That's very helpful. Um, David, as I think of the realm of geriatrics, um, are there any different angles or additions that you might add in terms of for some of our older members in this realm?
Yeah, I did want to just sort of segue from what we were just talking about, that when you've got a crisis or a stress that is prolonged, you know, that's, gets the person or the physiology in a completely unnatural state. You know, we used to responding to a stress and fleeing or reacting to it, but to have it go on for days and weeks, and really, we don't know how long, is tremendously stressful. So these practices that we were just hearing about are very important. And so I think, one of the things of like reaching out to others that we know might be alone, is very important. Those of us in the church reach out to those of the parish that, are alone. I think being out in nature, just, nature and beauty are kind of the same thing. And so spending time outside, even if it's on your porch, if you can't get out and walk, but, that's tremendously important, and it helps to reset the nervous system from that fight or flight
Right.
focus into a more, you know, relaxed state of mind.
Yeah.
That's really important, and anybody can do that.
Yeah. Yeah. I am. I'm appreciative of your, you both have mentioned it in your own ways, both David and Lori, in the moment of saying, you know, our spiritual practices are another way in which we can reset that nervous system, as you're saying, David. And so, I mean, early on, I know that we made a decision that we were going to try to keep things as familiar as possible.
Good.
We have to do some, you know, obviously some things we had to be creative with, but we, by God's grace, a number of years ago, the Vestry of Trinity invested in the capability of live streaming our services. And for a number of reasons, we hadn't activated it, but we were able to get that up and running right away. And so we're trying to keep some normalcy to our parish life with our worship on Sunday. We're now live streaming our midweek service, and the contemplative prayer group is meeting online. So I do think that our spiritual practices of prayer and connection with one another in these means is another way in which our responses can be reset, if you will. I'm thinking, I keep on thinking about the way in which our teenagers experience this. And I know many of you have worked with teenagers, but I'm looking at Jason as someone who also has teenagers at this time. One of the things we've done is we've kept our weekly meeting with our teens online, and that's been valuable so far. And are there any practices you think of when you think about this resetting of our nervous systems and our tendency to freeze or flee at this time, Jason?
Yeah, I think, you know, with that, there's definitely that fight, flight, freeze kind of response that we can have to this anxiety. And another way I kind of think about it is this anxiety comes up for this fear of scarcity, as evidenced by no toilet paper being on the shelves at the grocery store. You know, this
Right.
fear that we are going to lose out kind of causes us to become more selfish and to be a little bit more self-focused instead of reaching out. And much like David said, the longer this goes on, the more our need to contribute, to give to others, to help each other through this will become more essential. And so we want to give as much as we can, not to just ourselves and our families, but to figure out how we can really lift others up, whether it's doing the prayers of the people through this process, whether it's being able to write someone even a letter that can go through the regular mail or an email or something to let them know that you're there for them, contributing in some form or fashion. And we sometimes underestimate or devalue how much prayer is not just for our life, but the prayer for others, and what an impact that can have, especially for those who are isolated, knowing that people in the church or in the community or in the world are praying for them. And so that ability to contribute, even from a distance, is really important in a way for all of us feeling like we can contribute. And we have that in spades. We can give that out pretty frequently and often. So it helps us move from that state of scarcity to being able to move to that belief system of abundance, which, you know, is really what we do have in a lot of ways. There's been a lot of social changes, but the God that's always been is still the God that is today and will always be. And in just remembering that, both for ourselves, our family, and for those and, you know, our bigger calling to go out into the world. And I still think there's a lot of good news to be had in all of that. And many of the families I'm working with, even online will share like, yeah, this is hard, that is tough, but I'm learning things about my kids that I've never learned before. We are connecting in new ways that we've never really discovered before. So there is opportunity even amongst the tragedy and the stress and the concern and the fear that goes along with that.
Yeah. You just mentioned on something that I think I want to spend just a moment even more on, and but I do think is can be hard for us to discuss at this point, because how do we keep ourselves, how do you hold something light when it's a serious situation? In other words, there will be an end to this, and yet we don't want to minimize the seriousness of the situation, and yet a word of hope is needed. A word of hope is true, just as you said, Jason. The God whom loves us from the beginning still loves us. The sun will come up tomorrow. We will be well, in whole and in part. And I think that's an important piece that I want to just lift up for us at this time, is that. And do you have any of you, do you have any ways in which it's healthy to look toward the tomorrow in the midst of what is one of the things I think that is present among us emotionally about our emotional well-being now, is that there's a lot of grief. Our seniors in high school are in grief of the experience of school that they will not have. Our seniors in college are having the same grief of not being able to be with loved ones, grief of missing out on opportunities that have been planned for a long time and maybe have had lots of money applied to them. There's lots of grief. So how do we, what are some of the best ways to focus on the hope of tomorrow in the midst of a grief that's real, and not minimize the grief? Lori?
You know, I work a lot with people who are going through, have either been through a trauma or are going through a trauma. And I found that it was actually very helpful to consider how they would be after this thing had passed. So an example is, and it applies in this a little bit, but let's say you've got an ailing parent, an aging parent, and you know they only have, 6 months, a year. And the question that I ask my patients to examine is, after this is done, after your dad has died, a couple of years later, what will you regret not having done? How do you want to be as a person in this moment? So everybody is giving up something because of what we're going through now. Many people are gaining something. All right. But at the end of it, we will come to an end. There will be people, unfortunately, that we know who have gotten sick and may have died. There will be lots of changes. Who do you want to be in that? Do you want to be the guy who, beat up somebody in the grocery store because he was giving you the hairy eyeball? I mean, that kind of looking back. Give yourself 20/20 before we get there, almost.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think that's a wonderful place for us to go ahead and conclude, because I think, ironically enough, I think our gospel for today, Sunday, is touches upon this as well. The church, when you think of and you look at history, the history of civilization, the church has been through many, many challenging times, and some of them that look a lot like this, the plagues and so on and so forth. And as I am hearing, as our a spiritual leader here at Trinity from so many, that it is these practices, it is our life together as a church community that is holding so much together for me. And so I just want to lift that up and thank you for reminding us. I'm not the only one reminding us. We're reminding each other together that it is the presence of God with us now, who has always been the same yesterday, today, and forever, as it says in the New Testament. And this God will be with each and every one of us tomorrow as well. Well, I just can't thank all of you enough for taking a moment out of your day to be with us and to share a little bit of your own perspective for our emotional well-being through these times. Thank you for the ministry that you do, because let's be clear, I consider you all on the front lines of this crisis, as well as you care for your patients and for human beings who need your assistance and need your help and need your guidance as well. So on behalf of all the members of Trinity, thank you for what you do. We, of course, pray for all medical professionals who are caring for the sick, the suffering, and those who are emotionally distressed at this time. So thank you for what you do. May God bless you. May God bless us all. And stay tuned. Come back to this, your email that you got this morning to connect to our live stream worship that will happen at 10:45. God bless you. Take care.